10 years of my life that I've pretty much lost to severe OCD, anxiety and depression.
If your mind's telling you that, you could have attacked someone, you could have hurt someone, you could have done something harmful, and you're starting to think, what happens if that was real? Anything I was morally against, anything that I despise, anything that you can think of that you dislike in a person, my mind could have told me I was that person. My mind was just like, you shouldn't be here anymore. You shouldn't, you need to give up. And it was a constant battle going on through my mind. And I thought, I just don't know what to do. I can't really go on. I went into my cupboard, pulled out some old gym kit that I hadn't worn for years. And I honestly believe the decision I made that day changed my life, saved my life. I started to walk and then I started to run. And I was never a runner. I didn't like running. And my thoughts stopped for the first time in 10 years. Over that next 2-3 months, I was running every day. It's now a foundation where, I provide kit, trainers, support to young people, but also deliver a lot of stuff in schools, talks and workshops.
Welcome to School of Rock Bottom with Oliver Mason. I'm an actor, a voiceover artist and a recovery coach, and I've been in recovery many years, and I know firsthand that rock bottom can be the greatest teacher and the springboard for a beautiful life. And as you know, I invite fellow creatives and all inspiring people that have hit rock bottom, survived and thrived. This is a podcast of hope and how to get out of the darkness, into the light, into the joy, into the recovery. And that's why I'm so delighted, because I've got the amazing Ollie Newton in the studio.
How you doing?
Ollie, it's great to see you, mate.
Mate, it's great to meet you. And thanks a lot for inviting me. It's a real honour.
Absolute pleasure. And thank you for coming down from Leeds, I think it is.
Yeah, Leeds, yeah.
To see us today. I really appreciate it. I'm sure the viewers and listeners will as well. For those that don't know Ollie, I'm just going to give you a quick bio, just so that people know exactly all the amazing stuff you do. So Ollie Newton is a mental health speaker and educator. After suffering for years with severe OCD, anxiety and depression, in July 2017, Ollie turned to running as a coping mechanism, a decision which would change his life forever. Since then, he founded the Run for Your Mind Foundation, Lights on Wellbeing and Talks for Change Company. Ollie has delivered impactful presentations both in corporate settings and educational institutions all around the world. And like I just said in the intro, I love to invite inspiring individuals in the mental health space. And Ollie, you certainly are one of those, mate. And when I came across you on social media through a mutual connection, I was like, wow, this guy's doing some incredible stuff. Before we dive into all of that, I think you know how I'm going to start.
Yeah.
With maybe the hardest question. We're going to start with your rock bottom and then we're going to sort of go back and then chronologically work our way through. So if we could start there and just try and take the listeners and viewers to your rock bottom moment.
There was probably 2 moments in my life where I certainly hit rock bottom. And the first time it happened was, I remember I'd moved away from my family because I was struggling so severely and I didn't want my parents to sort of see the struggles I was facing. And I ran away from my friends. I deleted everything from social media, and I was living in a different country. I moved to Spain, took a job over there thinking that was the right idea, but actually it was probably the worst decision, one of the worst decisions I could have made. And I ended up working in the sports, the gambling industry, and I remember going up onto the smoking area up at work, and I was smoking a little bit, cigarettes, even though I was never really a smoker before. I was drinking quite a lot on an evening just to try and get to sleep, just because the thoughts were so constant with the intrusive negative thoughts, and I was struggling severely with anxiety and depression. And I remember being stood on the roof of a workplace, not actually physically on the roof. It was a smoking area. Anyone could go up there. And I remember looking down, and my mind was just like, you shouldn't be here anymore. You shouldn't, you need to give up. And it was a constant battle going on through my mind. And I thought, I just don't know what to do. I can't really go on. But I was able to sort of keep going because I had, even though I was away from everybody, I knew the love, that I had from them. And that was probably the first time. And the second time was probably 4 or 5 years later, because this battle that I faced, little did I know at the time, was going to face 10 years of my life that I pretty much lost to severe OCD, anxiety and depression. And probably around 7 years into that, I remember going down to London, and this is the second time it happened. And it was actually a bit of quite a big moment in my recovery journey. Actually, I'd gone down to visit my friend who had just moved back from Lyon, and I was actually she'd been in Porto, and she'd moved back, and she lived in London. I was like, I need to go and see her. And at this stage, I was so trapped by these thoughts. I was like having to physically like document my every move on my phone. Like I couldn't look at another person in the eyes. My mind was telling me I could have hurt them, I could have done something unlawful, could have cheated, could have harmed them. And it was just brutal. I was writing note after note in my phone, and the iPhone notes were a bit of a catalyst really in my journey, because at the time I thought, this is great, I can write stuff down, I can document everything that I'm doing. But actually it was probably really just fueling the fire. And I'd go home on a night after being dragged through it, if I ever left the house, which was quite rare at that stage, you know. And I was reading back through these notes of like, you know, could I have done something bad? Could I have, you know, what could I have done? And I still didn't believe it, you know, a lot of the stuff. And I remember walking through St. Pancras, I got there, somehow made it, and I just hit the floor. And I was sat on the floor, crying my eyes out for about an hour. And I didn't know what to do. No one spoke to me. No one came and asked me if I was okay. And I think that for me was, I knew I was at rock bottom. But I actually feel like, you know, about 4 or 5 hours later, when we eventually sat down, had a chat with my friend who I'd eventually got over to see, and you know, I feel like that was a turning point in my journey really, because it just seemed like the only real way was up from there. Like I felt like it can't get any worse than this, it can only get better. And that's sort of how I reframed it. And it was a couple of years before things changed, but you know, that was, I guess, the beginning of a journey of thinking, actually, you know what, I need to do more. I need to try and get better, or try and make some changes.
Wow, thank you for sharing all of that. I mean, I can't believe how much you went through, you know, and also to the point where you had to like move countries and delete everybody. You know, it must have got really, really, really painful, and so heartbreaking to have this image of you at the train station sobbing and nobody stopping to check if you're okay.
I was sort of out the way, but like you'd have thought it might have raised something. I think definitely in this day and age, it'd probably more people are more aware and alert to this sort of situation, because you know, and especially now, you know, in train stations, they're really well trained on you know, how to identify a crisis, because you know, I wasn't in a position where I was really ever wanting to die, if I'm honest. I always wanted to live, but I was just struggling so bad that I didn't really know what to do. And I think in this day and age, we're talking 8-9 years ago now, I think people are a lot more sort of aware of these situations.
You're right. The last decade, things have increased a lot, you know, around awareness. I mean, partly down to individuals like yourself talking about this stuff. I know that in retrospect and with hindsight, I think you're able to kind of see early warning signs as early as 7. I mean, you probably weren't aware of it at the time, but I wondered if we could just now kind of chronologically work through from that point up until maybe the rock bottom, and just kind of how things kind of progressed, you know, starting with you at 7. What kind of things were you noticing as a young lad then?
So for me, I actually remember, and I always talk about this in all my talks, the very first time, you know, this happened, you know, the very first time I knew I was a little bit different. And it was on holiday in Menorca. We'd been out for a meal with my family, and we were walking down this street, and I walked past this lamppost and I touched it with my right hand. And then I carried on walking, didn't think anything of it. And then probably about 100 metres down the road, I was just hit with this overwhelming fear that if I didn't go back and touch that lamppost, my whole family were going to die. So I ran back fast as I could, touched the lamppost, and I honestly believed by just completing that one little act that, you know, I'd saved everyone's life. But I guess little did I really know back then that was going to be the start of something that was going to materialise into something that was going to be really difficult, you know, through my younger years. But definitely as I got a lot older, and you know, these sort of things started to creep in. I remember I'd seen a film on monsters when I was around the same age, Monsters in a Cupboard. They always say it was Monsters Inc, and it wasn't. I'm a little bit too old for Monsters Inc, but and I had this fear, and I'd go to bed on a night and I'd check my wardrobes before I went to bed, and then I'd get into bed. But what started to happen was every time I started to do these little, you know, traits, these little rituals, whatever you want to call them, I started to make these little mistakes, and every time I made a mistake, it'd build a further ritual into the following night's routine. And it got to a stage where, you know, I was doing these checks 40-50 times. My dad was in the bedroom underneath me, and my mum, they'd be banging on the ceiling, you know, after, like, you know, I was in the attic, they'd banging on the ceiling after about half an hour, 40 minutes, like, what are you doing? And I could never explain it to them. You know, we'd go down in the mornings, and you know,
my dad would occasionally make a joke about, like, you sound like he used to say it was like sleeping under a greyhound track. So I was going like going around the room at 100 miles an hour, but they didn't understand what I was going through. And no one really understood that sort of stuff back then.
So you were doing lots of different rituals in your room, basically?
Yeah, so in my room. So I was, in some nights, it was taking me an hour and a half just to get into bed. I was 8 years old. This went on for years.
Wow.
And it was really, really tiring and frustrating. And a lot of this stuff was built around routine times. Like, it's very common for young people to for these traits to be really sort of apparent during times of, which you're sort of comfortable routine, brushing your teeth maybe, or, going to bed on a night when you're meant to just go to sleep, or even just leaving the house in the morning. That was challenging as well. Have a lock the door, go back.
And you had to do these routines because if you didn't, you believe something bad was going to happen.
It always actually resulted back to that same thing. If I don't do this, then something bad's going to happen. And that's exactly why when my parents would ask me, what are you actually doing up there? Like, are you worried about something? I couldn't tell them because my mind was saying, if they know why I'm doing this, then they could die. And that's how it was for me. And I just wish I could have spoken about it back then, but I just couldn't. It just wasn't, for me, it wasn't at that moment in my life. I just never discussed these little things that were, and it was, they were more, they'd build up and then they'd die down a little bit depending on what was going on. Some of it could have been related to stress and, school and things like that. And definitely going into sort of secondary school, they obviously didn't have the fear of monsters, but I was still doing these routines. Actually, my mum and dad still live in the same house, and when I go back, I check my wardrobes before I go to bed.
Right.
Once, thankfully.
Yeah.
But it's just a strange, thing that I'd got myself caught up in. And there was a lot of these things during the day, stepping on grates, going back, stepping on grates, have a lock the door, going back, flicking light switches on and off, on and off, on and off. Got to do it 10 times. And, if you live in a house with someone like that and you don't actually have any understanding of it, it's like, what is going on? Do you know what I mean? And was there
always, sorry to interrupt, was there always like one ultimate belief, or did it always change? Like, for example, I don't know, the belief could be, my parents something bad's going to happen to my parents, or would OCD change the outcome?
I guess more often than not, that was my biggest fear at that time growing up. Certainly as I got older, things definitely took a turn, but that was, late in my later years. And sort of in between that time, secondary school, the teachers, they could see something wasn't quite right, but I was a good lad. Like, I was a good kid. I was sort of the class clown, but I wasn't like malicious. I wasn't doing anything really nasty or harmful. In fact, if anything, I spent a lot of time like trying to support other people, in the school who were maybe not getting the help, like being bullied and things like that. I'd always stick up for those people because that was who I was as a person.
And your rituals were designed in your mind to help other people as well.
And I think it's exactly that. And I think and I think looking back, through school, it was so difficult because the teachers were talking to my parents about me having ADHD. And this was, ADHD, it wasn't really it wasn't understood like it is today. It was very different when I was, when I was younger. It was sort of quite new. The NHS had only just started speaking about it, and kids who were getting diagnosed with it were generally, kids who were probably a little bit more naughty than I was, maybe, and they were saying I'm not naughty enough to have it. But obviously we know now that's not the case, and it's been a bit of a revelation getting a late diagnosis of ADHD actually over the last 2 or 3 years. It's helped me really understand why I was how I was as a child, because it isn't about being naughty. It's about, we probably need a bit of extra support. That, we've got a lot of internal noises going on and it makes it really difficult for us to maybe complete tasks in the same amount of time as everyone else and focus on certain things. And for me, it's been, a bit of a revelation. That.
Obviously, OCD and ADHD are separate things.
Absolutely.
But in your experience, did they sort of fuel each other in
100%? Yeah,
right.
I think when you look at the two on paper, there's a lot of, they cross over quite a lot, and they're very often, I believe, quite entwined. I'm not saying if you've got ADHD, you have OCD, or you have, sometimes you're likely just to have like the one. But for me, I actually struggle now to differentiate what a lot of my, what is this the ADHD element of it? Is it the OCD element of it? And one thing that's been incredible for me is getting put on some medication when I was, 2 years ago, which has actually allowed me to control the thoughts and the struggle, you know, the OCD element as you know as well, you know, and it's been incredible for me on my journey, you know, to be able to actually manage that better.
Yeah.
So they're very much entwined, I believe. I'm obviously not a doctor, or you know, from what I've learned from my own journey, it seems that a lot of the things just sort of, they seem to coexist, I think.
Yeah. And so, I mean, that sounds so scary, you know, as a child going through all of that and then going up into secondary school, which is obviously such a difficult time anyway, even if things are relatively stable, you know. Did you do those rituals at school as well, or was it always confined to when you were at home?
It was it's really common to sort of mask, you know, these sort of these rituals, these behaviours, and I think I was able to do that very well at school. I struggled, but it was almost like, again, they were sort of really built around that those sort of routine times, evening, when I'm in a safe space. And sometimes it's difficult to get out of that place when you need to leave in the morning, for example, and still to this day it takes me a long time to leave the house. Have the doors been locked, checking it again, you know, and things like that. But yeah,
and I guess you felt like you couldn't talk to anyone. I mean, I'm guessing at that age, because I can imagine as a teenager anyway, you don't really want to be talking about. Well, I didn't anyway as a teenager, you know. My sort of default with my friends at school was, yeah, I'm all right, you're all right, and that was about it.
That's it, yeah.
I can imagine that would have been quite difficult to talk about, particularly as a teenager.
Yeah, 100%. And I think the one thing that always stands out is, like, through my friendship circles, is like, everyone says we should have known that by just when we used to be watching TV, or when we used to listen to radio, or, you know, if we were in one of our parents' cars and we were getting a lift somewhere, like, it had to be on an even number for me. If it wasn't, I couldn't sit there. Like, it was like, and that's one of the only things that maybe I was a little bit more vulnerable with, and they may have seen that element of it. And you know, obviously sometimes you're in certain situations where, you know, school might put something on and you're in a room full of 300 people and they've got it on number 15 or number 17 or the dreaded number 13. And then, you know, it's like, it's hard, you know, it's like really difficult, like really anxiety provoking. And yeah, that's one of the only ones that really I let slip during that time. But, you know, going through school, I was the happiest kid, you know, even though these things were happening on a night. I believe, personally, looking back, knowing where I am now in the journey, like I think I was probably self-medicating through exercise. I was always playing football, tennis, rugby, any sport that I could. And there was a lot of lessons due to my what they were calling behavioural problems, which obviously aren't behavioural problems. And I had a really great teacher called Mr. Kent, Paul Kent, and he really supported me through school, and he kept me in school. Like he'd offer me the opportunity on lessons that I wasn't really allowed in, that I couldn't focus in, where I was probably a bit of a disturbance, to teach the younger kids PE and things like that. So I had some really good people who were really believed in me as a person, rather than seeing the fact that, you know, the so-called behavioural element of it.
So it sounds like, you know, exercise gave you self-esteem because it was something you were good at, but it's sort of on a more kind of practical level. Did it stop the intrusive thoughts? Like when you were running or doing exercise, was it able to sort of silence that temporarily?
I think as a kid, I think there were just a lot of the stuff was so, you know, especially through school, it was, I think it was just more around that ritual, you know, the routine time. So it wasn't so apparent in school. So I sort of was all right, but yeah, I think it's more when I left school and we just, you know, you start drinking, going out, partying and all that. And I think for me, that was when things really was probably slowly declining, but I didn't really realise it.
Well, I was going to ask you that because, you know, obviously you're in school and you're functioning relatively well. And then you get to the point at 21 where you're moving countries, you're deleting everyone off social media. It sounds like you were trying to escape your life. Were you sort of trying to reinvent yourself somewhere else and disappear? What?
No, you know what? It's a really good question, but it wasn't that. It was more protecting the people that I really cared about, and I didn't want them to see me, the person I'd become. And it's difficult to even think about it, but you know, my life changed after a night out. I was 21 years old. We'd been out on a night out. Nothing actually happened. I didn't do anything wrong. One of the lads who I was with, who was not it was a part of the friendship circles, but not a close friend in the group. We'd seen him cheat on his partner, and it didn't sit with me. Like, my morals, and I could probably speak on behalf of a lot of people with OCD. Our morals are off the chain. Like, we are, and that's the reason why certain things impact us, differently. It hits differently.
Yeah.
And I'd seen him cheat. We'd questioned it the next morning. Why did he do it? And it was actually his response that sent me on this spiral that I didn't realise at the time was going to be 10 long years in the dark. And it was, his response was, when I asked him why he'd done it, he said, I don't remember it. I don't remember doing it. So it didn't happen.
Right.
But rather than me being annoyed with him, I was in a relationship of probably 2 years at the time. I was happy and I was settled. And my mind switched to, what happens if you've done something when you've been on a night out, and what happens if you've cheated? And it started off with one thought, and that was it. And then all of a sudden, that's all I thought about for like a month constantly. And then I was going back up over all the nights out I'd been in during that relationship, that 2 year period. I was going back up through all the nights, sort of, could I have done something then? And then creating these false memories. And I was having to go to people that I'd seen on these nights out 6 months ago, and I was asking them, I didn't do anything daft, did I, that night? Like, I didn't, I wasn't trying it on with anyone or anything like that, was I? And it started off being about cheating because of my morals. I hated anything to do with that. I didn't hate people who did it. I understand. I don't really understand it, but I know people who have made them sort of mistakes in the past, and they've paid the price for it.
Yeah.
But for me, it just didn't sit with me. And it started off being about cheating, and I'd go through it. It was almost like someone was playing a tape recorder over and rewinding it, playing it again, rewinding it, playing it again. It's just these thoughts like, could you have done it? And then I'd start thinking about their mouths, their lip. Could they have kissed me? The sensation. It was just, I just become totally consumed, and anxiety, and then depression. And depression is what I guess, was the ultimate price I paid, because I got trapped in that sort of way for many, many years.
So depression came later for you in your journey, just because I guess all the intrusive thoughts, the OCD and the anxiety must have been so debilitating and crushing.
Exactly. Yeah.
That it caused depression.
Definitely, yeah. And I think when I look back over that 10-year period, I'd find myself getting stuck with a thought. So I'd focus on a thought, from one of the nights out, and then it'd be one person. Could I have cheated on my partner with that person?
Right.
And then I'd just like obsess over it for a few months, and then I'd replace the thought with a different thought. But it started off being about cheating, but then it crept into to everything. It was anything I was morally against, anything that I despise, anything that you can think of that you dislike in a person. My mind could have told me I was that person. It's like I could watch the news and someone had been attacked down the road, and about 2 miles from my house. My mind would be like, you were near there then. That could have been you.
Right.
And then all of a sudden, like, I'd be trapped in this new way of thinking of like, was it me? Like, could I have done this? And then I'd picture it, I'd imagine it, and then these thoughts would like come into my head, like, and I'd create these memories that weren't real. And then, and ultimately, all the way through that, I knew deep down I'd never done any of these things, but it was just the feelings attached to it. It was, I almost felt guilty, really guilty, for things that I know I'd never in a million years have done.
OCD is absolutely brutal, isn't it?
Yeah, and it's so misunderstood. And if you can imagine, how much it can really impact someone's life when, and I honestly believe that it's probably one of the biggest killers out there. That it's so misunderstood. So many. If your mind's telling you that you could have attacked someone, you could have hurt someone, you could have done something harmful, that could be your family member or something you'd never do, and you're starting to think, what happens if that was real? Then I can understand why it gets to a stage where I don't want that to happen, but I can understand how someone could feel like there's no real way out of it. And it's a real common one that no one speaks about, but thankfully, because of the position I'm in, I've spoke to many, predominantly ladies, females who've had children, that they can't physically, who've got severe OCD, they can't physically bath their own kids because their mind's saying, did you touch them and did you do something inappropriate there? And it's like, and these people are stuck with these thoughts, and they're like, imagine if I did do that. Imagine if they brushed up against me. Imagine if that was something I did intentionally. And that's what it latches onto. If you you know, whatever you hate and despise the most, your mind is going to tell you could be that person.
Yeah. And do you think talking about this like we are now is going to help people who are suffering in silence with OCD?
I'd like to hope so. Yeah, I really, you know, and one of the biggest lessons I learned, and, you know, one of the biggest things for me is the fact that I spoke out about the stuff that I was going through. And it started off, you know, on a social media account. But what I fast learned is that I'm not the only person feeling like this.
Yeah,
like,
absolutely.
so you feel like you're alone with the thoughts. No one else is going to be having these thoughts. You know, no one else is going to be having these thoughts that they've cheated. But actually, so many people can relate to this. So many can relate to that one I've just spoken to you about, you know, about females or males, you know, not being able to bath their children. So many can relate to the religious element of it. You know, so many people can relate to a real common one is married men. Their mind's convincing. What happens if you're gay and you shouldn't be in a relationship with a female, and they know they're not gay, but their mind's telling them they could be gay, and they leave the relationship because of that, right? And the opposite, you know, there'll probably be you know, gay relationships where their mind's saying, oh, do I not really want to be in this relationship? And your mind convinces you that you know, everything that you don't believe in and everything that you're not. And
I had an actress on a few months ago, shout out to Rhea Faye. She suffered as a teenager with POCD, where she was worried, she kept having intrusive thoughts that she was a paedophile.
Yeah, exactly.
And she turned around to her parents and said, just so you know, I'll never have children because I'm not safe to be around kids, you know. And it's just such a wicked thing. I mean, I doubt there's anyone with OCD who's not a lovely person. You know, I've never met anyone with OCD who's not just a really, really nice person. And it attacks those people that care the most. It just seems such a...
And the worst thing about that, and what you've just said, bless her, you know, her having them thoughts, is actually she is probably 99.9% safer to have kids than anybody else, because of the fact that she's actually never going to do anything like that, because that is exactly what we're not.
Yeah,
and it's
something that she's really big about talking about.
Yeah,
you know,
and and that's an incredible thing to do, because that's the one that I know a lot of people have suffered with, who you know, and you know, there was occasions where I couldn't actually speak to people about it because I was so frightened that I was going to end up with that thought, and there was times where that thought tried to get in. You know, where when I've tried to bath my own kids, you know, they might have brushed up past me. What did I do something wrong there? But because I was very aware of it, thanks to other people bringing that to light, that conversation to light, then I knew that was just one of them, you know. Whereas the other stuff with the OCD, it took me a long time to really get my head around it.
So not only are you suffering with your own mind, but it also leads to avoidant behaviours, so you don't get triggered or something might. And obviously with you, it turned into, well, agoraphobia, I guess, in the sense that you weren't leaving the house. Am I right?
Struggling to really leave the house for long periods.
Really?
You know, it wasn't sort of like I was staying in all the time, but I was doing none of the things I enjoyed. It was like someone had flicked a switch. Like I'd gone from being that lad who was going out every weekend. You know, probably the person who brought everyone together, the centre of attention, you know, anyone growing up around, you know, where I lived, they'd all come to our house before. You know, my mum and dad were very welcoming, and they looked after us, and, you know, there'd be sometimes 50 to 70 kids just in our basement that, you know, and that was, and I'd gone from being that guy to all of a sudden, you know, not being able to go into public spaces, not being able to go to pubs, bars, not being able to go out for like drinks with my dad, family, all these things that, you know, most people just take for granted.
And that's because your anxiety levels were so high. It was just like, just too much, too triggering.
Too triggering, but also it was a lot of my thoughts revolved around cheating. So it was always about, don't want to go to a pub. It might trigger something that, you know, when I was in that pub, is it going to make me believe? And that's how it, you know, is it going to sort of make me create further memories of things that I know I've not done? And I didn't want to be around people drinking very much. And it was challenging. And that was the reason why really, really early on in that journey, I decided that I've got to get away. And I was so close to my mum and dad, and I was so close to...
Did you just go without warning, or...
No, there was an opportunity at the workplace I was in at the time.
Right.
And I'd felt myself declining quite quickly. And one of the things I was able to just about do for some of the period was to hold down a job. but it was really, really difficult. Like, and there was an opportunity with the job I was in at the time to move away, they'd set up a new office in Gibraltar, and I had the opportunity to go and live in Spain, work in Gibraltar in the gambling industry. And I knew that I couldn't cope with these thoughts anymore. I knew that I was in a relationship which I was effectively ruining because of my mind, even though all this stuff was not real, and I had to get away from everything. So I pretty much left the relationship. It lasted another couple of months whilst I was over there. I left my family. I moved over there. I tried to fit in, and it didn't last long before I just literally tumbled again. And it was just, it's one of them, a period of my life where I just, it's quite scary, really.
Yeah, it sounds really scary.
Yeah.
And then if we fast forward a little bit, well, quite a bit. You talked about in the rock bottom moment, the second one, being in the train station and crying, and then speaking to your friend. I think you'd come back from Porto or something.
Yeah.
And you sort of marked that as a moment where recovery started to get into your mind, and you wanted to start changing things. Maybe for someone who's listening or watching this who can identify with your struggles, who's maybe feeling a little bit hopeless. It sounds like there was a moment in your trajectory where things took a positive turn, and just talk us through that. So you had a conversation with your friend, and what kind of galvanized you to start thinking, okay, well maybe I can, overcome this or manage this.
She mentioned something about learning to understand it better, like to try and figure it out. And at this sort of time, there was podcasts starting to come about. So there was something called the OCD Stories. I was listening to a little bit of that. I was starting to realise, actually, you're not actually on your own with this stuff. And it was a couple of years, I guess, before things really did change. I was still pretty trapped, if I'm honest, and I really struggled. In the mornings, it'd take me, I'd sometimes wake up at probably 7 or 8 in the morning, but it'd take me like 3-4 hours just to open my eyes. Because as soon as I did, I'd just be bombarded with these thoughts. Wow. And then I'd be stuck with them all day. And life had, if I'm honest, at that period had become pretty impossible. But around that time, I'd very, very luckily met my partner, who was literally been like a saving grace, really, for me, through those. And it makes me quite emotional to talk about it. But she came into my life very luckily through a job. When I moved back from Gibraltar, I ended up trying to get a job back in the gambling industry a year or so later, and it was in Leeds working for Sky Bet. And we met very early on in that journey, before things would get as things were sort of really dark. And I explained it to her. I said, look, you don't want anything to do with me. I said, look, I've got all this stuff going on in my head. I think I said to her that I wouldn't use this term now, but I think I said, I'm nuts. Just keep clear, but maybe because I said that to her, she was interested in what I meant. And then she asked me about it, and I told her. And that's the first time I'd maybe spoken in previous relationships briefly, but it allowed me to almost build that relationship around the fact, actually, look, I've got these problems. And, during that period that was really difficult, even the first couple of years of our relationship, the thoughts, just to give you an idea of how the thoughts sort of presented themselves, I couldn't give her a kiss for 2-3 months because my mind was saying, you're kissing somebody else.
Right.
So you're cheating. And I had to say to my partner, I said, look, I'm having these thoughts. I can't kiss you. I can hug you, but I can't kiss you. And she had to somehow understand that in a relationship. And you know what? She persevered, and she, we've been on a pretty incredible journey together. I became a stepdad overnight to three kids that just changed my life. They gave me a different perspective. I always say, when you feel like the world and the walls are closing in on you, and a kid swings past you on one of the light shades, and all of a sudden everything feels like it's all right, doesn't it? It's do you know what I mean? It's so, and they've kept me on my toes. They've shown me happiness in a different way, and been very much, I call them
torches in lighting the way through them really dark days initially.
Yeah.
And
so having another human being that you can be completely honest with, and share with, that sounds like a real catalyst. And obviously, having a sense of belonging with a family. And sort of so where did running come in?
Yeah, so running came in about sort of maybe 2.5 years after I met my partner. And in that period, we'd tried every therapy under the sun. Like we'd CBT, we'd even tried things like acupuncture, we'd had a counselling, spent thousands of pounds, and actually nothing was working for me.
Sorry to interrupt. So at this point, you were seeking therapies or medications specifically for OCD at this point?
Yeah, but I fast learned that there's never, and I may be wrong in this, but there's at the time, and I believe still to this day, there's not actually a drug that's specific to OCD. It's you're treated with some form of anxiety based or depression, antidepressant, and we'd explored all options.
And nothing possible. Was working for you
personally. No, at that period of my life, gotcha. And I'm certainly someone to shout about what people should do, and definitely getting that professional help is a key part to most people's recovery. But for me, it wasn't. And,
sure.
We tried all that. We tried to,
sorry to interrupt again. That must have been so scary.
Yeah, it was
2.5 years of, talking to doctors, maybe trying medication. I don't know. It's your personal.
Yeah, medication. I tried different types of sort of antidepressants. Some of them were really actually probably they were making it even more triggering for me. They were sort of like I really don't know how to explain it, but they were sort of overstimulating maybe. I'm not too sure. I tried a lot of different things. I was trying things like the beta blockers like diazepam, and they'd become a little bit of a problem for a while, but then I had to do away with them when exercise came into it, because they sort of speed up your heart rate, you feel like. So that it was challenging. It was really challenging having, I guess, going through that period of unknown, and also trying to, what my partner, who's now my wife, was trying to do, Emma, was she was trying to integrate me back into society. Like, let's go out to the bar, let's go out to try and do the things and overcome those boundaries that you're struggling so badly with. And we'd go for a few drinks, and I'd probably get, down half a drink, and I'd be picking my phone out. I'd be writing stuff down about, no, I've not cheated. I've not done something. People walking past me. It was impossible. And she was like, let's go. This is not helping you. And we've tried, we keep trying, and we keep trying to build. And that's something, I'm really grateful for,
she kept the hope alive.
Yeah, 100%.
And obviously, just to interject, we're not saying that medication for OCD can't work for some people. We're just sharing Ollie's personal journey.
100%. Yeah, because
it's
helped me in later times, which I can touch on as well. But the running element of it came into play when I'd been in the job at Sky Bet for probably about 4 years, and they'd watched me decline, and I'd be able to shy away sometimes, and in later years work from home and do things to avoid situations. I wouldn't go into meeting rooms because I couldn't be in there. I had to explain to them, and it was difficult. It was really challenging. But there was one time, my manager came up behind me, put his hand on my shoulder. I'll never forget it. And he said, look, we're really worried about you now. And they'd call me in anyway, and I'd sat in the corner like I usually did, be as far away from people as I could. So I didn't, sometimes I was able to mask a lot of it and try and get involved and try and be a lad and have the banter and things, but it was difficult. And he put his hand on my shoulder and he said, look, what's happening? We're worried about it now. And I turned around to him. I said, I can't see. And he went, what do you mean? I said, I can't see the screen. All I see is these thoughts all day, constantly going through my head. It's like back and forth. Have I hurt someone? Have I harmed someone? Have I cheated? Have I, all these things. And, getting into that relationship itself caused me a lot more pain initially, because a lot of it was a relationship OCD, and it was, so there was that challenge that made it a lot, that brought it to life.
It sounds like hell on earth what you're describing. I can't even imagine that amount of time and that amount of anxiety and intrusive thoughts. It's a miracle that you.
It's a miracle. I suppose that's why I'm sat here today to say, look, you can get through this.
Absolutely.
And you just got to find that,
we talk a lot about hope. We talk about the importance of being hopeful, but I think Dan, my friend, always says, you've got to take action. And you have. I think you've got to make a change. And that's what I did that. I after that conversation, my manager's response said to me, he turned to me and said, look, take 3 months off work and we'll pay you.
Wow.
You can take up to 3 months. And I was like, wow. And he said, we want you to get better and we don't want you to come back until you're better.
Wow.
And I took the opportunity and I woke up that next morning, similar to like I just said, I didn't want to open my eyes, but I knew I had to do something. And I almost felt at that stage that my family were aware of what was going on with me mentally. I had a few friends who sort of stayed with me on the journey, who I'm truly grateful for. And then I had my workplace now supporting me, as well as my partner. And I was like, I need to do something, and I needed to take action. And I remember waking up that morning, it was boiling hot outside, looked out the window, and I went into my cupboard, pulled out some old gym kit that I hadn't worn for years and some old trainers, and I just left the house. And I honestly believe the decision I made that day changed my life, saved my life. I started to walk and then I started to run. And I was never a runner. I didn't like running. Like I never enjoyed running, like a lot of people. But after about 40 minutes, I'd maybe run and walked maybe 4 or 5 kilometres. And my thoughts stopped for the first time in 10 years.
Wow.
They just stopped. It lasted 5 minutes and then they came back. Like faster, but it was unbelievable. And I lived for that feeling pretty much. Over that next 2-3 months, I was running every day and I was building up from running 4 or 5 kilometres to running 30 kilometres, 40 kilometres of running ultra marathons, like 100-kilometre runs, races. And it was like all of a sudden I was creating these moments of respite from the thoughts that had literally haunted my life for like 10 years. And all of a sudden I was having this free time to think. And it wasn't like everything was better. It was just, I was living for those little moments.
Right.
And for those moments, everything just felt like it was okay.
And did you find that when you weren't running, you were getting more moments where they were stopping, or was it just confined to when you were running, you were getting relief?
It isn't even when I was running. When I was running, it was sometimes more difficult because I always say it's like the thoughts are chasing me. So when, I know what I need to do every morning now. I put a pint of water by my bed. I leave my kit lined up. I'm out the door. My alarm goes off and I'm out the door in 10, 15 minutes, running straight away. Pint of water, straight out the door. And I know exactly, and I sort of gauged how far I need to run and how I'm feeling. So some days I might need 4 or 5, I might need 5 kilometres. Some days I need 10 kilometres, and I just give myself the best chance of overcoming every single day. And that's how my day starts. But it's almost like it's not necessarily when I'm running that it's, everything feels good. It's when I stop, everything stops. Wow. So it's like, actually when I was running a lot of the time, especially with OCD, it tries to catch you out when you're doing something else. So It was actually really quite a lot overpowering sometimes when I was running, the thoughts. But when I stopped, I had this moment of freedom, and that was pretty much what I lived for. And from that day, I was like, I need to share this, because I'm not alone. I'm sure loads of people can really relate to this.
So this is where Run for Your Mind, this was the birth of that, really.
Absolutely.
So for anyone who doesn't know what Run for Your Mind is, I know it's changed over the years a little bit, but in terms of its sort of journey, just quickly.
So Run for Your Mind was born from pretty much that moment. It was a month later, whilst signed off sick, I was like, I need to share this. And I set up Run for Your Mind on Instagram, and I started to sort of like write blog posts about how I was feeling, the difference running was making to my life. I was being really open about the struggles I was facing, initially not really showing who I was, and then, actually, exposing myself to the world and about my struggles and these thoughts, and been really open and honest about it, to be honest. And I thought if I set up this page, I'll probably be able to help a lot of people who are in a similar situation. But what I didn't realise is how in turn it would massively help me on my journey by listening to other people's journeys, and all of a sudden, I don't feel like I'm alone with it anymore.
And it's like a huge community now, right?
We've got, I've got a good following on Instagram, some great people who raise money for the foundation, which is now a foundation where, I provide kit, trainers, support to young people, but also deliver a lot of stuff in schools, talks and workshops. For a lot of schools they don't have a budget for mental health, not mental health as such, but like talks and things like that. They don't really have a budget to bring in external speakers and things. So it creates opportunities for me to go in there and do stuff, for free for them by raising money through great people who support me. We've got like an online Strava club, running club with 4,000 runners all over the world who, it was a really active sort of club for many years. And I'm a little bit, I don't really go on a lot of, you get very caught up on them things, and I've got to sort of protect my own boundaries as well sometimes, and I'm not as involved, but we've got a brilliant group of people who all believe in the mission that I'm on, and are there to support.
And it's given birth to other businesses and projects. I know you've got 100 Talks for Change, or Talks for Change and then 100 Talks for Change is, I think, something that you're about to embark on, or you are. Lights on Wellbeing. Just quickly, just tell us about those little companies. They're obviously all to do with mental health as well.
So what running allowed me to do was it created that freedom from the thoughts, but what it didn't allow me to do was to actually be that person I wanted to be. I still struggled with social anxiety, still wasn't going out and seeing my friends, meeting up with people, which was challenging. And what changed for me was probably about 3 years into the running journey. I remember reading a quote in a book, and it was, learn to become comfortable feeling uncomfortable. And that for me was something that really, that hit me. I was like, this is what I need to do. And I spoke to my wife about it, and we spoke about what are the challenges that I face? What did I struggle with the most? What would be the most uncomfortable thing I can do? What can I do with what I'm doing to take it to another level? And it all boiled down to the fact that I hated speaking in front of people. I couldn't do that. I couldn't talk in front of people. That was something I'd found difficult. I was all right hiding behind this Instagram account, but I really struggled to speak, in front of people. So that was the thing that I needed to overcome. And I set myself a challenge to overcome that. And I
sure did.
Yeah. So it's been, and what happened from there was I gave myself 6 months to a year to do it. Work approached me after about probably 4 or 5 months, and they said, we're doing this thing called the Untold Stories of the Business. Would you be willing to share your story about what you've been doing through Run for Your Mind? Because I told them all about it. They were an incredible company to work for. When I came back from my long-term sickness, they incorporated running breaks mid-shift and things like that to help me out. And they were really interested in what I was doing in the community I was building and the mission I was on. And they said, come and deliver a few talks around the business. And I did one on, it was really random. It was on the set of Victoria. It was in like a bunker at Leeds Bradford Airport, which they'd hired out for this like big yearly festival that we had. And I sat on Victoria's bed and delivered a talk to 300 people about my journey with like OCD and how running had pretty much saved my life.
And now you're going around giving talks all over the place.
Yeah, and that's what happened. And it was like, and you know something, it's like, it went from that to, delivering talks to, some of the biggest organisations in the world. Like initially through COVID, there was some great opportunities online. And from there, it's gone from, I was delivering talk. I think my first couple of talks, which was surreal when I think about it, I feel very lucky, but it was, my first one was with Microsoft Ireland, and then the next one was with Burberry online.
Wow.
So things changed quite quickly.
Yes.
And, and all of a sudden, like, people, it was relative at the time. A lot of people struggling, a lot of people in the same boat due to COVID. I did some really, cool stuff during COVID to raise money for like charities. I did a 100-kilometer run around my street, which was in the press, and I got a video message from like Gary Lineker halfway around. It was surreal.
Amazing.
So there was loads of like great stuff I was doing. Then I did a little documentary on my journey, and then from there it was like, what do I do next? And I got the opportunity to become an instructor through Mental Health First Aid England and train people, because what I found I was going into large corporate organisations. Sometimes I felt like I would become a bit of a tick in a box, like it was like, oh, I'm going in there. And how it felt to me was like knowing full well that 1 in 4 people, if the statistics are right, and it's probably bigger than that, are struggling in some way with mental illness or poor mental health, and I felt like I was just chucking a grenade in and been like, see you later, what can I do? And I thought, what can I do more? I need to do more. And I became an instructor through Mental Health First Aid England, so I could then not just speak to people, I could then back it up and support people and businesses long term. And that's sort of where we branched out with Lights on Wellbeing, which is, we've got a good group of speakers, 8 or 9 other speakers who deliver stuff on lived experience. My experience working in corporates is it is very corporate, and how do we lean on real life stories? Because ultimately for me, I think that it's people that have saved me, not necessarily, the clinical route. And
well, let's just touch on that briefly, because unfortunately we've got like 5 minutes here.
Okay.
So we're like, listening to all of that, and from where you were with these horrific intrusive thoughts that were so paralyzing to sort of where you are now, such a, no pun intended, a front runner. I don't mean to be in the mental health space, giving all these talks, inspiring all these people to go running. It would almost be easy to conclude, well, what sort of solved your main issue was running. I mean,
I think running was definitely, but I think it's difficult because I think people, once I allowed people back into my life again, they were huge. They really sort of kept me going. And what we do generally when we're struggling is we shut people out of our lives because we don't want other people to either see us struggle, or we're not vulnerable enough to speak out and show how we're actually feeling.
So it's been about sharing honestly how you're feeling.
Yeah, running.
Obviously exercise and running. Is there anything else that you think has helped? I mean, how are your intrusive thoughts now, if you don't mind me asking?
Yeah, no. So
how are you up with it now?
I'm in a much better place, and I think that might be because of the work I'm doing. I feel like I've got a real purpose in life, and I speak a lot about. I think one of the key things for me to always speak to people about is, look, recovery doesn't always look like the clinical route where you get that everyone feels, oh yeah, I'm going to get medication, I'm going to see a therapist, and I'm going to get better.
Yeah.
The other route that we don't talk about enough is called personal recovery, and my journey is very much a journey of personal recovery. It's about finding my ways to deal and navigate life in my own way and overcome the challenges that I face every single day. And my journey is very much a journey of personal recovery, and I know what I need to do every day. I get up and have my do my run, however long that might be. I lean on things like cold showers, 4 minutes every day. I've been doing it for just over a year now, and that's been a bit of a revelation for me. It gives me probably an extra hour or two's focus every day.
Yeah,
and
ton of dopamine.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly, that's what it is, and it gives you that what we crave when we've got ADHD, that extra dopamine hit that we need. Yeah. And it stops us,
It's so important that we're talking about this, because we know with medication across the board, roughly about 1 in 3 people medication won't work for whatever reason. Yeah. So the medication only route, there's a third of people on average that have to find another way.
Exactly.
And something I'm really big on is ikigai, which is the Japanese word for purpose. So it seems like purpose, sharing your feelings, exercise, having a real community around you. I mean, these are things that we see with, say, addiction and things like that as a way of overcoming.
Absolutely.
And it's just so inspiring, Ollie, the journey you've been on. I'm so pleased that you're in a really good space now.
Yeah, I feel very lucky, very grateful to be in the position I'm in, to do the work I'm doing. We, and having these opportunities, like last year, we did 100 talks across 20 academic days over 63 schools in the UK. We shared our story with like 20,000 people, and the impact that we're having now is just getting bigger and bigger. And I feel really lucky for that. And I think my message to anybody who's maybe struggling, who may be going through similar things to me is don't wait. Like don't just because that we say there's a wait list of 2 years through the NHS or 3 years or however long you've got to wait. Don't wait for that. Get on that list, but look what's around you. There's probably an Andy's Man Club, or a couple of I looked on it the other day, and one had just opened like 500 meters away from my house, where men can get together and speak and share about their struggles. Or there's local support groups. There's an incredible app called the Hub of Hope, where you can just put in your postcode and you can find all these local support groups within your area. Lean on people. Like, don't just wait and think, okay, I'm gonna have to wait 2 years for a therapist now and sit here and just and with my thoughts and struggle. Like, look for other ways, and if you can get into something like exercise, or find something that really means a lot to you, find reading or writing or art, all these things that people seem to maybe enjoy prior to facing any struggles, but then they you know, they forget about it, and it's done, isn't it? Like find something and find people.
I mean, you are absolute proof for anyone who's skeptical. You know, someone might think, well, if I've got a severe mental health problem, running's not going to help. You know, I feel so terrible within my own head. You're absolute living proof that something like running can massively help. So if that doesn't inspire hope in people, you know, I don't know what will.
Yeah, and it's not for everybody. And I certainly don't go into these places and then say, you know, you've got to run, you've got to do this.
Yeah.
But there's always something that, you know, can help you through those difficult periods. And, you know, we're in a totally different era now. When I started to struggle to today, you know, because of the work that people like yourself, myself, you know, these people who were trying to make the changes and encourage these conversations that we're simply not having.
Yeah.
It's different. It's not like it was before. It doesn't have to be, you know, going down that one route. There's hundreds of support groups all across the UK where you can find other people. If you're going through an eating disorder, there's someone there. Addiction, you can find someone. You can meet people, you know, and you can feel like, actually, you know what, I'm not on this journey alone.
Yeah. Ollie, thank you so much, mate.
No, thanks for having me. It's been absolutely
and sharing your story and your hope and how you got there. It's so inspiring. Like I say, the stuff that I found, I'm so glad I stumbled across you online. I was just like, I was doing a double take. I was going, all these things that you're doing, it's really, really inspiring and will help a lot of people. And I'm so pleased that, you know, you're in a much better place now with everything, and that, you know, you're doing all this amazing stuff in the space. And, you know, like I say, go to the show notes now. There'll be lots of links there on how they can connect with you and all the amazing things that you're doing.
Yeah, thank you, mate. And I appreciate you having me.
Oh, it's been an absolute pleasure. Lovely to meet you as well, Ollie.
Lovely to meet you too.
And a great name as well.
Yeah.
I like that. Absolutely brilliant. Guys, thank you so much for tuning in once again. Wherever you're listening to this or watching this, can you please hit subscribe, follow, write a 5-star review, write a review. That's very useful on Apple, apparently, and the algorithm. And as I always promise, I will be back in 2 weeks' time. Until then, look after yourself and see you soon.